Hello and welcome back to another of the Planet Zoo scenario series. Today we are tackling Maple Leaf Wildlife Park, and you can see us having a pan over the area here. Now, this is actually the point that I've got up to myself on scenarios. I've never made it past this point. I used to play on medium, and now I'm playing on hard, but I would always create a wolf habitat straight away, bankrupt myself, and that would be it. I would just move on to franchise mode after that. So hopefully this time I'll be able to get a little bit further, get all 3 stars for this scenario, and hopefully make a prospering zoo. At least that is the aim. Who knows what will actually happen here. Now, I have been working on a franchise mode zoo on the side, so I've had a little bit of experience between the last video and this one, particularly with rock work. I've been doing a lot of work with rocks, and I think you'll see that start to shine through in this scenario here. So my first priority is setting out some space for habitats. I like to use the areas that already have got kind of defined spaces in the scenarios. So for this one here, I see that spot down there and I think, perfect, I can create 2 habitats there. The first plan was to make 1 habitat, but it looked massive in terms of the square area. So I split it into 2 and figured I'd put 2 in there anyhow. My first priority was to get lemurs, so I was fully aware of how tall I'd need the barriers to be, and I would also later need to make them not climbable. So I take a look through the lemurs and I take a little bit of a look at how they kind of live. I actually asked a friend what sort of environments ring-tailed lemurs live in, and it said that they may be the first or only primate that lives in caves, which I found pretty interesting. So figured a cave would be a good idea for them, which is absolutely fine. Creates a nice center point for the exhibit as well. So I go ahead and I start using some mossy tropical rocks to map out the area where I want this cave to be. Takes me a little bit of time, so I've sped this up especially so because I do a lot of rock work here, and I don't want it to get too old too quickly. So I go ahead, I chuck in some rocks, and I start building up the structure. You can see I put some rocks around the bottom here, around the back. The article that my friend looked at with regards to lemurs living in caves, I think it said limestone rocks, and I thought, oh, these mossy rocks don't really fit that so well. So I started to put some rocks at the back of their cave there to make it look like, you know, underneath this, it is limestone. That is what we're dealing with here. Now, one of the hardest things I find about rock work is kind of integrating it with the surrounding terrain, and I've started to try and do a little bit more of that. I think maybe the best way for me to do that would be to make bigger habitats, and I might start doing that a little bit more to make sure I can get the most out of what I want. I've noticed it is something that is holding me back, so I think I'll work on it. Now, lemurs need climbable area, and I wanted to make it integrate this central part of the habitat, so I think I do a pretty good job of it here. I use the enrichment tab to kind of get those walkways for them, and then I integrate some more rocks again to try and make it blend in a little bit more and make it look a little bit more natural for them, combining tropical rocks, the mossy and dynamic moss. and then the non-mossy ones as well. And then I add some vines because I think it looks a little bit out of place, so some vines on there kind of integrates it a bit better with the habitat. And as mentioned before, I really like these trees, so I want to add some of those in, and I'm glad I do it there. Now, I think there's a real importance to making the different walkable areas accessible by both the animals and the keepers. I know I've had problems before about the platforms not being able to be reached by keepers, so I make sure that it is reachable there. And then I kind of just make it look a little bit nicer as well. Integrating it with the environment is pretty important, and just giving them more space to climb. These lemurs love to climb, so yeah. It really is important to make sure that we can enable them to do that. I actually am focusing a little bit on putting kind of those posts in there to make it so that the bridge looks supported. Really pleased with how I've done that. I think that's a good bit of realism to add to any build. You can see here I'm struggling to find what to place this other side of the bridge on. I settled for the trusty rock in the end. Any trees that I went for would have been overhanging the side of the habitat, which would have meant the lemurs would have been able to escape. Not ideal. But I think that having these two rocks with like a little walkway between them does look nice, and you can see that we can decorate that later as well. Now, in this series, I am starting to put a lot more time and care into each of the builds that I do. So I'm beginning to wonder if it might be worth putting one build per episode more so. I think that it'd allow me more time to kind of explore what I do with the build. But I now begin the process of finding which foliage to put in the habitats here. I go for a lot of these elephant ear plants. They really look nice. I find that in each of the biomes there are some plants that work nicely as a kind of like a filler plant, and elephant ear plants work really well for tropical. And you can see here are the vines that I was talking about adding. I think that it really creates that more natural feel to the climbable pathways there. And I'm really pleased with how I've done that. So I just add a couple more finishing touches to this pathway over here, and I really like what we're dealing with here. I think it's going really nicely with the entire habitat so far. So you can see that I add another little area of climbing there, and then I get to work on a bit more foliage. So I want the area to look a little bit greener back here. So I go ahead and add some bushes and then some rocks. I'm really loving rocks in this, so just putting some rocks at the back there. What I actually make looks a little bit like a crocodile, but I don't do anything about that, I just think it looks cool. So I go ahead and I add some more leaf litter, some tropical leaf litter, just kind of clutters the floor a little bit. And then I experiment with placing some trees underground as almost like bushes, but settle on these kind of coastal mangrove, I think they are. They look a lot like bushes, which they're a bit more sparse, so it looks like the animals could move through them, which I think is pretty neat. And I do that throughout the habitat. I really like that. It's something I should probably do some more of, if I'm honest. It's something that I haven't experimented with too much. And then of course, some more elephant ears. I figured it would be a good idea to kind of integrate some of the water features and things like that too with plants, because it makes it look more natural. Now, I decided that the front of the zoo needed a bit more attention. People are coming in, they're going to want to buy things. So I thought I'd make this little kiosk area. Mainly, this was an experiment more than anything. I'd never used the booths before, rather than actually putting in entire shops. So I thought what I'd do is I'd give it a try and see what it took to actually use them. So I spend some time muddling with the roof. I settle on kind of what we've got, which is this plank wall. I haven't researched much at this point, so I'm kind of limited. And then I close it in a little bit more to make it look almost as if it's a bit more characterful, as if it's meant to be there. I hide all of the extra overlapping parts, and then I put some signs in to make it really clear what is being sold in each of these places. I wanted the information to be absolutely apparent, and then just some cheap beef and gulpy signs here and there. Once again, I'm trying to hide the extra metal that I couldn't delete. It wouldn't let me delete, so I've just put some alpine Facina? I forget the name of them, but I've put them in there to kind of spruce it up a bit. So with that kind of entrance area done, I move on to another animal. I've got the Indian peafowl here, and I really struggle with these guys. Any kind of walk-through exhibit, I struggle to make enough room for the animals and for the guests. I think if I were to do this exhibit again, I would give them more room, but I guess that's how it worked out with the lemurs being there and everything like that. So I start work on putting in some shelter for the Indian peafowl. I know that there are going to be a lot of them, so I want to really make sure that they have enough room to shelter, and I also want it to look natural. I know that it would be much easier if I just put some kind of wooden structure up there and didn't worry about it, but immediately I am thinking, okay, they're going to need more than just one shelter. There are going to be a lot of peafowl. I'm going to have to put in multiple shelters. So that's what I do. I go ahead and do that and kind of try a little bit to spruce it up somewhat. And there I'm just making sure that the lemurs can't escape and make their way into the peafowl exhibit, which would be quite disastrous, just purely because there are people there. And then I mix some grasses together to make it look a little bit more natural. Like there are branches underneath the grasses, and add some elephant ears amongst the mossy rocks. Just kind of fleshing out the corners of the exhibit, and I'm checking what kind of plants they would have and everything like that. I think it adds a little bit of life whenever you put some trees into an exhibit. And I make the path a little bit more walkable for people. They don't care too much about the long grass, but they do like some short grass, so I want to make sure that they've got that. And honestly, I think that's always the hardest part of training for me, because I always seem to struggle with getting the grass proportions right. And then I wanted to make sure that they had some more broken trees. I really like the tree stumps to be used in these kind of exhibits, kind of giving it that old lived-in effect. I really like that. And the bracken and the fern are really good additions as well. I don't like the look of hills without much landscaping to them, so putting some stones in really makes a big difference. And now here we are getting started on the next exhibit. So this is almost like a different section of the zoo, with the lemurs and the peafowl on one side, and I wanted this to be kind of separate. So, of course, as it is a separate area, I figured that people wouldn't want too far to walk to get to the exhibits from the facilities. So I set up a staff room and a keeper hut over here. I noticed that the poles for this overhanging area weren't long enough, so I just flipped it upside down, which I was quite proud of doing. You know, I think it worked out quite well. But I wanted to make this look more natural, removing any foliage from inside the actual buildings themselves. And then I decided to do a little bit of designing of the buildings, making them have a bit more life to them. So I decided to double it up, give it a multi-purpose kind of feel to it, and make it have grapevines hanging down. So whenever the keepers or the other staff want to grab some grapes, they can do. Absolutely. Why not? And then I made it so they were growing some tomatoes in the back here. Again, maybe food for the animals, maybe snack themselves. And then they had a little plant in there too. I think it was a Swiss cheese plant. Just for their own enjoyment. Now, for the Nyala here, I really wanted to make sure that they weren't going to get stressed. This is one thing that I know about these animals. I often find that they get stressed quite a lot. So I wanted to make it seem as natural as possible for them. Especially around the areas where there is glass and guests are going to be able to see them. I didn't want them to feel as if they were, you know, being watched too much. At some point later I will get one-way glass and then it'll be less of a worry. But yeah, stress in animals is something I always want to avoid. So I made sure to add in quite a bit of foliage around the front of this exhibit. Hopefully to shelter Nyala a little bit more. And then, of course, adding in tropical leaf litter to make it look a bit more natural. Now, here I was looking to see what kind of environment these animals would typically shelter in. I spent a lot of time thinking about how I was going to do it properly, how I was going to represent their shelter. I'm not too sure if I'm overly pleased with how I ended up doing it, but you know, I think it was something that I could work with. And then here I was experimenting with something that I haven't really done before. I wanted to make it look as if the grass was more natural for what they were expecting. So I was putting in some dry buffalo grass, some normal buffalo grass, just kind of giving it that savanna feel more so. And then I was fully aware that they needed some kind of shelter. I wanted to make sure that they had enough room, and I was surprised to see that that wasn't enough. I really thought that would be, but fortunately this shelter was. Even still, it was a little bit close. We were running short on hard shelter space, and later I do go and add more. But for now, that is absolutely fine. We've got the hard shelter. And then I really wanted them to be separated so they didn't feel stressed when they were resting. I know that it doesn't make too much of a difference, but having that area where they're able to hide from the guests really, I think, makes a difference. And then, of course, using the paths that the Nyala and the keepers would probably take more to give it a bit more life and character to the exhibit. I really like doing that kind of stuff, so I'm pleased with that. and then fixing up the terrain a little bit more, going in, adding a little bit more grass. I'm very aware I'm reaching the end of the coverage kind of scale, so I decided to do this main area here, and I'm quite happy with that. I think it looks nice. It's almost like a savanna area. I go to start adding some more and realise that I've kind of got to the edge of the coverage. That brings us to the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.